Joining us today. Today we will be going through evidence in Arthur Miller's The Crucible. On the OneNote, you will have had access to this table. It's called Theme Summary Table. Otherwise, a very similar template is available on your Act 1 and Act 2 pages, where we have the themes in the left-hand column. So the consequences of seeking and maintaining power, social status and being an outsider, punishment, guilt and shame. The next two columns are critical to the work we are doing today. And in the left column, we will be doing the events of the Crucible and organising them into theme, and then having matching quotes in the next column over. The reason that we do that is because it's theme-based essay writing. You will be given a topic, and that topic is shared between the Crucible and the dressmaker. This way, by using this table, you'll be able to select evidence which is relevant to the key ideas in the text. We will then keep this table, and when we study the dressmaker, we will also add in events by theme and quotes by theme and have a go at comparing and contrasting the significance. As I go today, type the key events and matching quotations for each text into the box. We will at a later date do the compare and contrast because obviously we need to cover the dressmaker. Theme 1. The consequences of seeking and maintaining power. We have colour-coded the quotes to match the event, so that way you can see what evidence corresponds. You may wish to go and seek further evidence when you are revising for the SAC. So the first event, which is about seeking and maintaining power, is that Reverend Paris is convinced the town is against him and that they will continue to turn against him if he starts talking of witchcraft. This is very early in the text. He is obviously unhappy with his niece, Abigail, and he has heard whispers in the town of the infidelity between her and John Proctor. A quote from the text says, "You compromise my very character." Reverend Paris is very worried about his character, his name, his reputation as the minister of the village. He needs to be seen as pure and holy, and he's worried that the people in the town will turn against him. If they turn against him, it would be very difficult for him to maintain power and maintain his status as a reverend in the township. We then have where Abigail threatens the other girls to keep their conjuring a secret. This is about maintaining power. Abigail threatens the other girls and says that she will bring a pointy reckoning. Abigail has come to live with her uncle because her parents were murdered by American Indians. Now, Abigail has come from a trauma background. She's slightly older than the other girls and is obviously mature in some ways. She uses this and her status as kind of the leader of the group and really threatens violence to ensure that the other younger, naive girls continue to support her and her end goals. This leads to the next scene where Abigail and the girls are able to accuse others of witchcraft for personal gain. Now, this isn't just a one-time thing. Abigail and the girls, they're able to ascertain this level of power because they firstly start by accusing people who are low risk. They accuse Tituba because she is an easy scapegoat. Because of Tituba's background and being a Barbados slave, they are able to easily point the finger at her with no evidence. They then move on to other characters like Goody Osborne and Goody Good. These are basically no-name people in the village. They are seen as being weird and different, so it kind of makes sense that they're next on the hit list. Once they start to get this credibility, because remember, Tituba admits to dancing with the devil, so that's as good as the girls being correct. From there, the girls are able to really bolden themselves and ascertain more and more power. Some of the key quotes include, "Where she walks, the crowd will part like the sea for Israel." "The girl is a saint now, and the noose is up." These quotes show that the girls have moved from lowly maids in Salem to obviously much more revered characters who actually have some control over their situation. Abigail then uses that power and she accuses Elizabeth Proctor of witchcraft. Now, we, the reader, know that there are alternative motives to this. Unlike other people in Salem, we've had the insight through the text, and we know that that affair between Abigail and John did actually occur. And we know the conversations between John and Abigail, where it is clear that she still has very strong feelings towards him and really strong disdain for Elizabeth Proctor. Remembering, the other townspeople don't have the same insight as us. Some quotes about this scene is, "She wants me dead," "I am but God's finger," and "she will cry me out until they take me." It's clear that Elizabeth Proctor is acutely aware of Abigail's status and now power within the village. Previously, it was Elizabeth Proctor who held more status over Abigail. Abigail was her maid. She put her out as a harlot, and essentially Elizabeth Proctor was a good Christian wife, thus putting her above Abigail in the hierarchy of things. Elizabeth is now very aware that the hierarchy has changed, and as such, the power has changed. We then have Reverend Hale, and Reverend Hale is a minister from Beverly. He's well versed in witchcraft, and it is his role to question the proctors. It is clear that Hale has a reputation. He's very well trusted because he is seen as knowledgeable in the area of witchcraft. Thus, that's where his power comes from. He explains that he himself has examined others that have confessed, and it's also talking about not judging people guilty or innocent. Yet it's pretty clear that that is exactly what Hale does. Hale talks about examining people. Well, none of this is particularly scientific or probably upheld in what would be our modern day justice system. But essentially, if Hale essentially believes that you are a witch, then that power is essentially for him to also confirm that you are guilty of those things. In terms of our other characters, we then have Judge Danforth. Now, Judge Danforth is seen as a pretty dark character, and there is a scene where he is confronted by John Proctor, Giles Corey, and Francis Nurse. Now, these men have all had their wives accused of witchcraft. They are generally seen as well-liked men in the town, with probably the exception of John Proctor, who has not been attending church regularly, but the others have fairly good standing. As men in the community, they would be seen as having some power, and also they probably believed they had a voice. Now, Danforth does not particularly take well to these men confronting the court and basically accusing these girls of lying. Now, remember, Danforth is signing these death warrants. He too is responsible for the deaths of some of these people. As such, he's probably not going to back down on his views and values. So he's not going to like what John, Giles, and Francis have to say. Some of the things said in this scene include, "Do you take it upon yourself to determine what this court shall believe?" And this is an attack upon the court. We very much see here that it is Danforth that holds all the power in his position as a judge, and that he strongly believes that the men are attacking him, the court, and by extension, God. As such, the men in this situation are powerless to save their wives. Lastly, we have, as John Proctor takes Mary to court, Abigail and Mercy Lewis, two of the girls. When Mary speaks out and starts to support Proctor, starts to dob or snitch on the girls and say it was all for sport, none of this is real, the girls essentially use their control and their status to stop her revealing the truth. They do this by pretending that Mary has witched them. So they resort to the screaming and the crying and the "stop it, Mary," and essentially put the victim status back on themselves, and Mary has no choice but to bow down to the will of her friends and to once again follow the ruse. They say things like, "Do you send this shadow on me?" And Mary is very well questioned by the people in the court, because they say, "Well, a little while ago you were afflicted and now it seems you afflict others." So poor Mary, again, like many others in this text, doesn't have the power to change the things that are happening to and around her. We then move on to another theme, and this is the theme of social status and being an outsider. Firstly, the Putnams influence other townspeople to investigate witchcraft. This is in our opening scene in Act 1. They're the first people to talk about witchcraft. They really implore Paris to strike out against the devil, and they really try to lift themselves as authority in the town. It's clear that the Putnam people ceded this province, meaning that they are really well-revered people. They have been in the town of Salem for a long time, and as such, their name carries a particular weight. So initially, we start to see in Salem this hierarchy of certain families having a lot of control, certain families having a good reputation, such as the Putnams, and a lot of this is dictated to based on land. This is in stark contrast to Tituba and Sarah Good, who are both minorities, and they are amongst the first people accused. As I said previously, these people are easy scapegoats. Goody Good is seen as kind of the town nutter, Tituba due to her heritage. Essentially, they are easy targets. Some of the evidence against them is quite thin. She comes to me in my sleep, and the devil's got numerous witches. Because they are outsiders in the community of Salem, very little evidence is required against them in order for them to kind of feel guilty in the minds of the townspeople. And again, because of their social status, being the bottom of the bottom in this town, they really have no other choice than try to save their own lives by saying that they were indeed witches. This is accompanied at a similar time with Ruth Putnam. Now, you may remember her as a minor character who too was afflicted by the fact that she would not wake, very much like Betty Paris. Now, when Ruth Putnam awakes, she accuses her parents' neighbour, Mr. Jacobs, of being a witch as well. It's clear that Mr. Jacobs and the Putnam family actually have some type of dispute, as the Putnams seem to do with most people, over land and boundaries. And it would be advantageous for the Putnams to acquire Mr. Jacobs' land if he was found guilty of witchcraft and could no longer tend to that land. The young girls are told to take courage and give us all their names. And I think just as a moment of opportunity, Ruth Putnam puts forward the name of Mr. Jacobs, and that will obviously help her family's social status. We then see another example in Mary Warren. Now, Mary Warren is a character you can refer to in many ways. We spoke about her on the power slide, but also here in terms of social status. Like many of the other girls, Mary Warren is a maid. She is an unwed woman in Salem, and she is quite young. Now, Mary Warren has been working for the Proctors since Abigail's dismissal. Essentially, if you are working for a family, you are to follow their instructions. Now, Mary Warren defies the Proctors and she continues to attend court with the other girls. She is involved in accusing many other townspeople of witchcraft. Now, the Proctors don't like this. And in a time before the accusations of witchcraft, you would have seen the Proctors giving Mary Warren instructions and her following them without question. But because of this complete change in power and the social status of the girls being lifted, they've been seen as quite holy and officers of the court. And as such, Mary Warren now feels that she does not have to follow the orders of her employers. Now, she is confronted by the Proctors who explain, how do you go to Salem when I forbid it? And she is told that she will be whipped if she leaves this house again. Yet in this scene, Mary Warren remains defiant. So we do see a younger person from a lower social status really standing up in this scene. Lastly, there is Rebecca Nurse. You may remember Rebecca Nurse from Act 1. Rebecca Nurse is an older woman in the village. She is very Christian. She is well, how do I put it? She's very well received by the people in the town. She delivers their children, and as such, she is seen as an elder of the village. But remember, this is a Puritan society, so women and men weren't particularly equal. But regardless, Rebecca Nurse has a good reputation. Even Rebecca Nurse is accused of witchcraft. It is said that if Rebecca Nurse is tainted, then nothing's left to stop the whole green world from burning. This really compares Rebecca Nurse against the other types that have been accused. She isn't a Tituba or a Sarah Good. This really is the beginning of the downfall where anyone can be accused by these girls. What ridiculousness is that this woman who is devoted her life to Christianity and devoted a very long life to the people of Salem and their children, that people now believe that she is a witch. So the hysteria has generally taken on a really serious thing here. This is not an outsider. This is one of their own on the inner circle now being accused. Our third theme is punishment, and this can also be linked to fear. Now, the girls initially fear hanging for witchcraft. For the dancing in the forest, which they certainly did, they only would have been whipped for that. But they were out there with Tituba attempting to conjure Ruth's dead sisters. But also Abigail wanted to drink a potion to kill Goody Proctor. Of course she did. Now, it is the girls' fear that motivates them, as well as their fear for what Abigail will do to them once she kind of starts this ruse. And they explain that witchery is a hanging error. This shows how the Puritan values of the town and the era in which the text is set is really important. These people are very superstitious. They certainly believe in God and they certainly believe in the devil. And that fear of being accused and being hung is very, very real and very, very legitimate for these girls. So we have to look through that lens. They're not all malicious girls. They're not all like Abigail with alternate agendas. Some of them are a product of the society in which this is set. We then have Mary Warren, who we've discussed previously as a great character that you can use in many situations to show your text knowledge. She tries, but she eventually refuses to reveal Abigail's lies. She says, "I cannot charge murder on Abigail. She'll kill me for saying that. Abby will charge lechery on you, Mr. Proctor." She does try to forewarn Proctor that there will be consequences if the two of them go to court and try to tell everyone what Abigail has been up to. Mary Warren legitimately fears Abigail, but also she knows that John Proctor will face his own punishment for lechery or adultery, because that will come out in court as well. This ultimately leads to her fear, and eventually she does back out of supporting John Proctor and then goes back to the girls, and in that same breath, she does then accuse John. But we'll come to that in a second. It's important that you know this text in a really holistic way, and knowing more events and more characters is really important. This text is more than just Abigail and John's affair. Giles Corey is a character who is jailed, and he is later killed for trying to defend the accused. Now, what Corey did is that he went around and he got all these signatures on a piece of paper. And essentially it was to defend all the people that were in jail. Remembering there were 400 or so people in the lockup because of these girls. They were from good families, such as his wife, Martha Corey, such as Francis's wife, Rebecca Nurse, Goody Proctor. And he gets all these people to sign their names on a document to attest that they are not witches. Now, this backfires for Giles Corey. He goes in there all brave, full of conviction, sure that his status as a man in the town of Salem would be enough. In fact, He is jailed for contempt of court. They want to see the list of all these names, and he knows that every single person who has signed their name will be punished, interrogated, perhaps accused themselves, and hung if he then tells on them. Now, Giles Corey is profusely punished for this. He is not hung. In fact, he is pressed to death by a large stone. What they do is that they lie him flat and they place a big stone on him and apply more and more weight as a form of punishment, hoping that he will relent and confess everything he knows. Now, Giles Corey ends up dying in response to this, and rather than tell on his neighbours, he asked for more weight to be put on. You can see a list there which we have poor Corey and Proctor trying to do their best to reveal Abigail's lies, to protect the women that they love, but essentially this is not working. Some key quotes there. He means to hang us all. I see his filthy face and it's mine and it's yours. And you're pulling down heaven and raising up a whore. Essentially, these two men, Corey and Proctor, are very critical of Danforth and the courts. And it's clear that Corey and Proctor are not going to be believed and they are going to face their own fates. But good on them for trying. Lastly, in terms of punishment, everything backfires terribly on John Proctor, and his ally Mary then accuses John. She went to court with all the best intentions, but her fear of punishment and exclusion through Abigail just overrides her loyalties to Proctor, and she turns around and basically says that he is the devil. Initially, Proctor confesses to avoid death, and he does so verbally. He's like, oh, I don't think he particularly cares. But once he's told that he has to sign his name to his confession and that it was going to be nailed to the door of the church, the door in which he hung before Reverend Parris took over, John sees the world completely differently to some of the other characters, and he sees this as a greater punishment than what he is really entitled to. He knows he's done the wrong thing. He's been an adulterer. He hasn't treated his wife well. He hasn't been a great Christian man. He hasn't always gone to church, but he still believes himself to be good. I don't think at heart he actually is a good person, but he does know that he has sinned. And this is just too much for Proctor. He won't be punished in this way, where his family name is ruined and his reputation is ruined for something he actually didn't do. He exclaims that God does not need my name nailed upon the church. And instead, Proctor decides to take the alternative punishment, which is death by hanging. And I think that this really brings into focus the term punishment. For some, punishment is different. And he would rather face that than the punishment of losing his name and his reputation. Much like Rebecca Nurse as well, who chose a similar fate. Lastly, we have the concepts of guilt and shame. There is plenty of it in this text. It starts right back at the very beginning with Betty and Ruth, who both fake possession in order to hide their acts in the woods. We can talk about this being about fear, but it could also link to guilt. They heard that the rumor of witchcraft was about, and essentially the girls put on a ruse that they were sleeping and they could not be waked. This is their juvenile way of trying to hide what they were doing in the woods. Now, going back to the accusations, there are some accusations before Tituba is accused of witchcraft, and that is that Abigail is accused of having an affair with John Proctor. Now, this really isn't out in the village, but there are whispers that there has been an affair going on. Paris is beside himself about this. How could a reverend's niece be sleeping with a married man? And even he's heard the whispers. Abigail tries to cover it up, saying there was no blush about her name and that she would not have it that her name was soiled. Well, unfortunately for Abigail, yes, there were whispers. It's clear she's been fired from the Proctor's household for some reason. And the rumour is going around town that Goody Proctor has put her out for being a whore. Fair enough. This is probably the biggest thing with guilt and shame. Does she feel guilty about it? I don't think she does. I don't think she has any regrets. I think that her feelings are deeply hurt. I think she's worried about her reputation in the village if it's to get out. She wasn't particularly worried about hurting Goody Proctor, but I think she's certain that she certainly doesn't want to have that rumour going around the village. It would obviously impact her future. She would likely not get a good match in terms of a husband, and in those Puritan societies, it was their purpose to find a husband and have a family. And the better a husband you could find, the more prestigious, the better. So poor Abigail, in some ways, is really backed into a corner there. Now, it's clear that John wants to end the affair. He says that he thinks of her softly from time to time, but he is very firm in telling Abigail, I will cut off my hand before I reach for you again. It's clear that John's been busted by his wife. John really has been having some difficult times at home with Goody Proctor, and as such, his guilt and shame is weighing on his shoulders here, and he tells Abigail that the affair has ended and to not think of it again. This is confirmed in the next scene where John and Elizabeth discuss his adultery. We can feel in this scene that there is tension in the air. John explicitly says to Elizabeth that you forget nothing and you forgive nothing. He explains that like a Christian, I confessed, obviously to his wife, but not to God or to the village. And it's exclaimed that it's the magistrate who sits in your heart that judges you. There's a lot of judgment going back and forth between John and Elizabeth Proctor. This changes across the course of the text. John thinks that Elizabeth is really cold. She's really cold-hearted. She keeps a cold house, meaning that there's not a lot of warmth and affection in the Proctor house, and that this was the catalyst for the affair. Elizabeth is a very proud Christian woman. She basically tells her husband that adultery is not on, that this is a sin. And obviously there's been things said and done in the Proctor household that we're not privy to that have led to this tension in the air. She's obviously giving him the cold shoulder. As we get towards the end of the text, we do see a lot of change in our characters, and this is something you may wish to highlight. We see a huge change in Reverend Hale. He lets in that guilt and shame, remembering he was the one that went to the Proctors and was quizzing them on their commandments, and he was the one signing these warrants and bringing people in and conferencing with them and saying, yes, they were with the devil. Well, Hale realizes the girls are not being honest. He's one of the few people in a position of power that actually realizes that this is wrong and that they have been wrong. And he is deeply, deeply afflicted. Remembering he is a Christian himself, he hasn't set out to do this maliciously like some of the other characters. And he exclaims, I have signed 72 death warrants. I am a minister of the Lord, and I have gone and taken a life without there be a proof. Huge realization for Hale, massive amount of guilt for his role in what's happened here in Salem. He finally admits that Abigail struck him as false and that he had made a mistake in his duty. So Hale is a great person to look at in terms of how guilt and shame transforms over time. You know, when people do things, sometimes they don't feel immediate guilt. Sometimes it takes a long time, and that realization over time going, I've done the wrong thing. Oh my God, now I feel terrible. And that's what's happened with Hale. John is a little bit the same, but his guilt kind of shifts up and down. We see at times that he is trying to hide his guilt and shame, but ultimately he throws caution to the wind and reveals his adultery to the court. He's like, let people shame me, let my sins be out there. I'm not going to feel like this anymore. But he admits to the courts that he had known Abigail, obviously in an intimate way, and really drums home that Abigail means to dance with him on his wife's grave. So he essentially stops trying to hide the guilt and shame, let the adultery be out there, let him be judged. Hopefully he will save his wife in the process. Now we know kind of how that ends, and it's not well for John Proctor. But there is one more thing that happens, and that is that Elizabeth Proctor, the good Christian woman she is, lies. And she does it to protect her husband. Remembering we just talked about her giving him the cold shoulder, the cold house that she had, that she forget nothing, she forgive nothing. And they bring her into the court. She doesn't know that John has confessed to being an adulterer, and she lies. She protects her husband, showing the depth of their bond despite the disloyalty in their relationship previously. She says that her husband is a good and righteous man, which if she had have just come into the court and said, yeah, no, John's been having an affair with Abigail, this is what's happened. But she doesn't. She really just tries to save her husband and the family name. And even John is just distraught and thinks, oh, my wife who never lies has come in and done this, the complete opposite of what I wanted. But she is probably feeling a little guilty herself for the way she has treated John in the wake of the affair and thought only to save his name in that moment. So that takes us through our evidence. If you can complete your table and it has the events with the matching quotes, you might need more quotes to add to it, but at least you know what scenes to put in there now. It'll give you a lot of focus when it comes to essay writing and a lot of focus when it comes to comparing similar or slightly differing events from the dressmaker.